This is the Real Footy Podcast. Coming up, Geelong and Hawthorn stage another Easter Monday classic, but the Cats come up trumps. Bailey Smith is the name on everyone's lips again. A star young Bulldog goes down, and Geelong's manna from heaven. It was a bumper 5 days of Easter.
Melbourne want to transition. It's an open 50. So Viney just kicks it to Cozzy and says, "You go to work, young fella. You go to work. You run in. You show a little bit of candy and kick number 5."
Darcy. Gee, an awkward landing there, Darcy. I hope that's not bad news. Let's have a look at this. And just that hyper extension.
Yeah, the second follow through. Oh, yeah.
Wow. Ouch. Next score wins maybe. Dangerfield almost short out to Jack. Nailed in the tackle. Scrimshaw. Stangle gave it to Manna. Manna shot a goal. He's kicked it. Manna's got the goal. They lead it by 7 points with 3 minutes to go.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sam McClure, and joining me today, the current chief football writer of The Age, Jake Niall, and his predecessor, Caroline Wilson. Welcome to you both.
Hi, Jake. Hi, Sam.
Sam?
We're opening the podcast with some bombshell news.
And that is that Noah Balta, of course, the Richmond star defender, has in the last few minutes before we started recording been sentenced. He has avoided jail, Caro, but he has been given a 3-month curfew where he will not be allowed to leave his house between the hours of 10 o'clock at night and 6 o'clock in the morning, which of course will have a significant impact on his ability to play football, particularly this weekend in Anzac Eve.
Can't play Anzac Eve, can't play Dreamtime, can't travel interstate. Richmond have got games in Sydney and the West at the very least. This is, and I hark back to Pete Ryan's most excellent column in The Age on Monday, where he spoke about Richmond's failing as a community leader in this decision. But this has left the AFL with massive egg on its face as well, because they have led the judge into this, in my view. I'm not saying the judge was any tougher than, is it a male judge, I think it was, than he or she would have been had Balta not played. But by making the decision to let Balta play before the sentencing, and I know the sentencing was put off, Jake.
It's a female judge.
The female
Magistrate
judge.
Melissa Humphrey.
I'm sorry. So Melissa Humphrey, I mean, she's not swayed by what Jacinta Allen says, by what Jack Revolt says, by what so many community leaders have said, by what the victim's father has said. But by letting him play, they turned this into such a massive community issue, Jake, and it just angered people so much. And we kept seeing the vision again and again and again, which it created this sort of scenario where I'm not saying she was tougher, but she certainly wasn't going to be any more lenient on Noah Balta. So it's embarrassed both Richmond and the AFL.
I think particularly the AFL.
Why do you say that, Jake?
Well, footy clubs, in my long extensive experience of dealing with these sort of stories, not exactly like this one, footy clubs always protect their own players and interests. And that is, and I'm cynical about it, yes, it's a bit unseemly at times. The times where they take a really hard line on a player, from what I've seen, is when the player lets them down internally, as in Steve Johnson at Geelong, more so, or Heath Shaw and Alan Didak, more so than when it's someone who does something to the community, which is disappointing. The Taron Thomas one, somewhat of an exception, that he got North Melbourne sacked him. Now, they sometimes just sack them, but Noah Balta just signed a 7-year, very lucrative deal. I think that the AFL, the club will get away with what they can and how it looks. The AFL is the one that has to really come in harder than the
in the end, it was
club.
the AFL's decision.
The AFL made the decision. So Richmond, I think, would have been pretty happy with the outcome to get 4 weeks. Now it looks very embarrassing and there's a lot of damage. And he's ended up with, if you look at the number of weeks that he's going to miss, it's going to be, by my calculations, either 8 in total or 9. And I don't count the 2 pre-season suspension.
And there's 4 weeks of floating fixture. We don't know. I mean, Richmond mightn't get any night games in that time, but they might.
No, but the judgment ends at July 22nd.
Yeah, but the floating fixture starts at June 22nd. So
No, but he'll be out of that. No, but he'll be out of that. I think he's out of that.
I mean, we probably
No, there's 4 weeks of floating fixture, Jake, where Richmond might get night games that he can't play in.
Yeah,
between
but
June and
I'm
July.
factoring that into it. Let's say he gets 1. I'm factoring that in. So he'll get 4. He'll get 4.
Yeah, I mean,
It's staggering to me that the AFL, and they've said this to me, Sam, even if we had seen the vision and we hadn't, we would have made the same decision. And they keep saying 6 weeks, but it wasn't 6 weeks. It was 4 senior AFL games and 2 practice games. That it still amazes me that they were that lenient.
the thing that gets me is when you talk to people at the AFL and who are largely process driven, when you think about, who's there, Andrew Dillon, Stephen Mead, Laura Kane, all extensive legal backgrounds. The thing that was said to me was, well, imagine if the magistrate had delayed sentencing until mid-September, would we be, well, it wasn't delayed till mid-September. It was 2 weeks. And what a farcical situation that played out over the weekend, that a lot of Richmond people were forced to throw out this line that, oh, well, we support Noah. He served his time. He played an amazing game for us on the weekend. Ben King only had 2 kicks. Amazing to me that, the only person that seemed to show real leadership on the weekend was their former champion full forward, Jack Rewald, who said on Fox Footy, both before the game and after the game, that he was largely uncomfortable with how the club had handled things. I mean, good on Jack for putting up his hand. But how embarrassing and what an amazing lack of leadership by Richmond and the AFL that they have now been left, to use Caro's word, completely embarrassed by this. He can't leave his house for 3 months during the night. He just played a night game on the weekend where he was arguably the difference.
And you know what? It's a great reminder to the AFL and to the footy public and to the clubs and to the players that the AFL are not actually a court, and the court, the laws of the land are so override
Anything else?
We act sometimes because we have all these judicial type investigations and we have a tribunal and we have they effectively, they rub out the Giants players rightly.
We have the integrity unit.
Unit. We act like they're the government. They're not. They're a sporting organisation. Some of their handling of these things is done largely for appearances and for brand protection. And in this case, they've come off the worst, even though Noah Balta in the end is still going to miss a total of about, 9 games.
But don't you think, Jake, that they, by playing him, they flaunted the situation?
Yep, they did.
And they flaunted it to the judicial system it was a New South Wales court, correct? It was a New South Wales incident. I'll have to get my legal facts right. But either way, they flaunted the situation. And by him playing
it was
well...
in Albury, so it was across the border.
Yeah,
Albury local court.
By him playing well, flaunted it even more. And by him getting the opportunity to play, flaunted it even more. And silly Damien Hardwick coming out and bagging the Victorian Premier when, he was probably deflecting and showing his political colours. I don't know what he was doing.
Well,
but it was not...
He was defending his former player.
No, he should have stayed in his lane, and that was a really dumb decision. But the Victorian Premier probably wouldn't have been, and she only commented when she was asked the question by a journalist on 3AW, but she wouldn't have probably made the comment had they not played him until after the sentencing. So everything just compounded to a perfect storm, which took place in that Albury courthouse on Tuesday morning.
Do you think Richmond, honestly, to be a bit cynical here, do you think they'll care because they won the game? And let's be very clear on this.
Absolutely should care.
Oh no, they'll be very embarrassed by this, Jake. They'll definitely care.
They would not have won that game.
Who cares if they hadn't won the game? Who cares?
But they've lost.
No, I don't care. But they would not have won that game without Noah Balta.
Well, we will never know, Jake. We'll never know. But the point is,
kept Ben King to 2 kicks.
They've now got less chance of winning on Anzac Eve. They've got less chance of winning Dreamtime. Blah blah, and that is all, as we say, pretty irrelevant.
And it's a rebuilding year.
When you look at a bloke. And you are rebuilding with a lot of impressionable and brilliant teenagers who've come into the club.
It's a great point.
And what are you telling them?
What message are you sending?
And I'm not just saying this now. I mean, I have been saying this for a few weeks. And Richmond have said to me, and the AFL, what if they'd put off well, they didn't. They put it off till April 22.
It's 2 matches.
It was 2 games they had to wait.
It was only a matter of, 1 game?
And
it was 2.
Yeah,
but because he didn't play last week.
They didn't play him in the other one. They were not
but I don't think they
one.
played him in gather round.
They played him in 1 game where this.
I don't think they played
live.
him in gather round because that would have been poor for the Barossa Valley. I honestly believe that, and I think it was embarrassing.
Instead, they played him against a bunch of under-18s. in a All-Australian practice match. And this whole fiasco, the entire thing would have been avoided with a 3-paragraph statement from AFL House. Given the delay to Noah Balta's sentencing, we would deem it inappropriate for him to play football in the meantime, so we have extended his suspension until the judge is able to clarify the situation.
Sometimes you've got to be pragmatic, and they make crazy decisions going too far the other way, like fining Ken Hinkley $20,000.
Well, just to put it in perspective,
and then they do this.
Just to put it in perspective, if you look at the AFL punishment, it's quite conceivable that as we sit here today, Connor Nash could get more weeks for that incident than the AFL gave in games missed.
In senior games missed. Yeah.
To Noah Balta.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't actually mind that because that's a judicial... That's an on-field judiciary system that we shouldn't compare to the court system. But I think we're all agreeing. Richmond made
what's
a blue.
What's the
AFL...
double jeopardy argument? But the argument's more that they should have waited till sentencing.
Wait till sentencing and then see.
Given that it was a short time frame. Now, if the sentencing had been in September, then you can't do that.
No, but if the sentencing had been in September, I still think 6 to 8 weeks was far more appropriate for what Noah Balta did.
Well, you put it in perspective. I mean, the wacky Wednesday, which was very offensive. I think Josh Fay deserved 4 weeks. Jeremy Finlayson got 3 weeks for a homophobic slur. I think this looked light. Very light, and it was arm was inflicted, and there's an out of court settlement.
Yeah, that's right. He was paid,
and he pleaded guilty.
The victim was paid $45,000
and he pleaded guilty
in civil court.
So it's a bit of a shemozzle.
Okay, you talked about Connor Nash. Let's move on to the game. What a sensational spectacle at the MCG, an Easter Monday record. 88,000, and Jake, to steal one of your lines from your column in the paper, it might not have been Picasso, but it was Jackson Pollock if it wasn't.
Yeah, a messy masterpiece was the way I put it, because it was
some of that kicking.
Because a lot the mistakes made it exciting.
It did.
So it was really tense. I just love Geelong and Hawthorn games. I think they've been. For this century, I think they've been the best games between two clubs of any of them. Since
and Easter Monday, even when Hawthorn have been completely out of contention, rarely disappoints.
Yep.
And, we saw for first time in a long time, they're both very much in contention. And it was an extraordinary game. I mean, the personal stories, Bailey Smith, James Sicily's struggles.
Dangerfield again, standing up as a forward.
Patrick Dangerfield.
Yep.
What a performance!
Well, not only
Manner, as you wrote about today.
Yeah, well, not only Patrick Dangerfield doing what he did to finish that crucial goal at the punt road end in the last quarter when he hooked it back, and I'm sitting behind it in the press box, and you could see off the boot that's going right through. It was just curling back beautifully. But Geelong and Chris Scott resisting the temptation to throw him into the centre square when they were getting smashed, absolutely obliterated, 11-zip. In clearances for a period in the second quarter. And the temptation would have been there to put Dangerfield back in there, where he's been one of the best players in the comp, even though he's 35, and just held his nerve and kept him in the forward line. You've
both been covering footy for a long time. Can I ask you, when you look at Bailey Smith, Caro and Jake, who does he remind you of? Not so much as a player, but he's such an entertainer, and the headband with the blonde locks, like what he did with Impey across the boundary line. He flips another little mini bird to the crowd a week after getting a fine. He's kind of this bad boy who's also an excellent player. Yeah, I mean, the blonde locks, you say Trevor Barker, but Trevor Barker was never a bad boy. He was a beautiful footballer. Can you think of anyone?
Yeah, a couple. They're not exact.
He's an original to me.
I would say one that just jumps into my mind is Phil Carman, because he drew attention to himself and he was turbulent. His career wasn't as long or consistent as Bailey Smith, but his highs were extraordinary and his lows were very not so good. And I think there was another one. Brent Croswell.
Okay.
I just as a sort of a player who played to the crowd a bit. You think of, I mean, Mark Jackson was an extreme. I'd say he was an extreme, but a bit of a rat bag, really.
Yeah, I'm still not sure about Bailey Smith, and he admits himself, he's got issues, and his off-footy life is difficult for him. He struggles, and you look at these two troubled Western Bulldogs, himself and Jamari Ugle-Hagan, and what they've been through. The difference is that Bailey Smith clearly just loves football. and loves training and
Yep.
is so committed to that side of it that it's going to ride, hopefully, everything else. And he's just the player Geelong needed, isn't he?
Yeah, Matthew Lloyd made an excellent point across the weekend and said that Geelong, over the last 10 to 15 years, have probably been the best at recruiting for needs. You know, a lot of other clubs will say, well, he's a good player. You know, we better have him. Whereas Geelong are very surgical in how they, and Bailey with, like, forget the off-field stuff, his run and carry and his ability even late in games, he's not necessarily the fastest off the mark, Caro, but to get that extra 2 or 3 steps when everyone else seems tired. It reminded me a little bit of Ben Cousins, what he used to do for West Coast late
So
in
why
games.
wasn't Luke Beveridge playing him in the midfield?
It's a
They had a
question.
lot of players. They had Bonampelli, they had Jack McRae, they had Libba,
Trelaw.
they had Trelaw. They just had all these players. I mean, it was
Richards.
an embarrassment of Richards. Richards.
Pardon the pun.
I didn't mean that. That was
my fault. I put it in the wrong time.
But I think
that's a cop out though, Jake. To be honest, there's a lot of teams. With a lot
I'm
of
just
good
going on.
needs.
You asked the question of why that.
But he wasn't happy. He wasn't happy. He
wasn't
was out
happy.
of form. You know,
Well, Geelong.
he was being misused. I felt so.
And then
I
he did
just,
the injuries, which was bad timing, I guess, Caro.
and then he did his knee. So
Yeah.
you know,
I tell you what, it is happening though. It's Geelong are making a great pitch for players by just what's happening with Bailey Smith. If you're a bit unhappy at your club,
Hello, Clayton Oliver.
well, Clayton Oliver, but I would even say Harley Reid.
yeah,
You know,
and
like if Harley Reid, wherever he goes, if he goes to a big Melbourne club, whichever club that is,
If Harley Reid went to Geelong, I think they'd have to start an inquest into Geelong's TPP. They'd have to, wouldn't they?
there already is, isn't there?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, good point.
No, but the other point is, and I think Tom Morris reported in recent days that not one Victorian club would look at Jamari Ugle-Hagan.
I don't buy that for a second.
Geelong is looking at Jamari Ugle-Hagan. I mean, they're not looking. They have certainly not ruled him out.
And they would be one of 6, I would suggest.
If he's
But
available very cheaply in either pay or draft.
Well, let's touch on that, because I know that, Caro, you talked a little bit on the agenda setters on 7 as well. Look, how do both of you feel about how this could play out from a Western Bulldogs perspective? You know, they've obviously invested a lot of time into this young man, and it is conceivable that he doesn't play again for the rest of the year. He's got a contract for next year, and yet it's better for both parties if he moves on. But to your point just before that, it's not as though clubs are going to be bending over backwards to give high draft picks for him, Caro.
No.
So it's you do feel for the Bulldogs to some degree.
It's a disaster for the Bulldogs, and the AFL are running his medical treatment and his off-field treatment and all the deeply complex issues. We keep being told that Jamara is suffering while he's behaving, to be frank, on several occasions like a complete idiot and showing a horrible lack of respect for women, for the game, for his football club. And yet, because it's deeply complex, the Bulldogs have to keep paying him and can't sack him. And as you say, his trade value diminishes by the week, and he hasn't been seen at the club as we sit here today for more than a week. So it's a disaster for them. But they are being held because of this system that the AFL now has. Now,
If you were running the Bulldogs, Caro, would you just cut your losses even if it meant you got barely anything else through the door?
it's too hard for me to say because they still... No, look... As I sit here today, yeah, I would. I'd cut him loose, and just if I could get his pay back in the salary cap, I definitely would. Definitely would.
Depends on what you can get and how much it costs.
Well,
to me, it's a very pragmatic decision, but you don't owe him anything. I think that's for sure. There's no obligation of the club other than to make sure that he walks. You do want to be careful around his well-being in this day and age, and just generally, you have to be careful with his. Just a small note of caution. He's, 22?
21, I think.
21 or 22.
22
so
maybe.
you just got to be a little bit circumspect around that. Not all the circumstances of his life have been easy, and I think you've got to be careful, but you also owe an obligation to the other teammates. And the teammates...
Yeah, that's right. No one's bigger
the
than the club.
teammates, no one's bigger than the club. And if he's not... I'm always interested that the clubs are so tolerant of players that, by some measures, breach their contract.
Mm.
Yeah, well he
So
has.
if you can't actually turn up at the work, you're not you're in breach
So
of the law.
while we're on the Bulldogs, who had an amazing win on Sunday night, and obviously they lost Sam Darcy. We don't know how bad it is, and not as bad as we first thought, but it was terrible. So Luke Beveridge is out of contract this year. Marcus Bontempelli is out of contract this year. The West Australians reporting that the Eagles are going to make a massive play for Bontempelli. I don't think for a minute he'll leave. But the Beveridge one is fascinating to me. Melbourne are definitely contemplating a future without Simon Goodwin, and Beveridge is on their list. Whatever Beveridge says, he's on Melbourne's list.
Beveridge says he wouldn't go there.
He said he won't go anywhere if he's not at the Bulldogs. I find that really hard to believe. But do the Bulldogs re-sign him now?
I'd let it run. I'd let it run. I mean, not because Beveridge isn't a good coach. I think Beveridge has got enormous abilities. He hasn't been completely even in his coaching through his career, like Chris Scott, but he could be very successful at another club. But I just think they've got to work out also what the field of coaches is that they could get, because that list to me is attractive. I think they've got a lot of talent, and with Sam Darcy, touch wood, recovering well from that injury, and they've got close to the best player in the comp who's still at 30. Look at the age of look at how well Dangerfield and Pendlebury and Sidebottom and all these guys, and Jack Gunston even yesterday, are still playing. So there's no reason Bont can't do 5 good years from here. So to me, it's a great job.
Just like to offer my personal apology to Sam Darcy and his parents, Luke and Beck, as well. It's weeks and weeks and weeks of asking to do a feature interview on him, and the week I finally do it and put it in the paper on Sunday, he almost does his knee. So I feel like I'm the Moz. Don't be interviewed by me.
Yeah, it's terrible when that happens, isn't it?
Oh,
We've all done it.
Yeah.
Felt absolutely sick. But the good news is, as Cara said, it's not an ACL, but still seems like a pretty significant injury. Hey, the North Melbourne Footy Club have got significant problems. They have for a while now, Caro. I know we've talked about their problems ad nauseum for years, but this is becoming a real problem for the league, who have,
no improvement.
And they've concocted ways of helping them in the draft. They've now made sure that they've helped get, arguably the best coach of the last 25 years. They're paying $1.6, $1.7 million between him and Todd Viney of the $4 million soft cap. That they shouldn't be continuing to have results.
They don't
this.
give marquee games to clubs with small crowds and poor performances, and yet they've guaranteed North Good Friday for some time.
Yep.
So they can't have really done much more.
Yep.
For the Kangaroos, and yet they're still losing and leaking goals like they have been for the last 5 years.
Well, this is on Alistair Clarkson. I mean, you look at it, he is one of the highest paid coaches in the game. They've had a lot of access to talent, and some of their decisions have not been good. But if you look at the specifics of it, on the field, Caro and Sam, they don't defend. So they gave up, 150 points to Carlton? And Carlton had struggled to score in previous games, and they didn't have Charlie Curnow.
They didn't have
Harry
Mackay.
Mackay. Sorry.
They had Curnow kick forward.
They didn't have Mackay.
So
for that.
Nick Revolt said on the agenda setters that he needs to toughen up. He needs to be the Clarko of old, punching holes through walls, etc.
If you're going to go down swinging.
Yep, and my point was that he's been muzzled by the AFL actually because of his behaviour in recent years. I mean, he's been fined, he's been cautioned, he was actually banned from coaching on the bench last year. I think he's allowed back on the bench now, but he's still up in the box. So he's had to change his behaviour to suit the modern world. Is that affect? And he's also had this, terrible, for him it was pretty soul destroying, the whole Hawthorn first family situation, and he to the point where he was unable to coach for almost half or more than half a season, wasn't it? It was quite a long time anyway.
So you're saying he's been defanged by circumstance?
Yeah, I just wonder. I'm posing the question.
It's a very interesting point.
Is that affecting his performance? Because
possibly. Just another point I think is really valid as far as Clarkson and North compared to Hawthorn. Chris Fagan was an enormous ballast to Clarkson and to Hawthorn in that period.
And Mark Evans.
But I think Chris Fagan most of all, as a kind of person who could calm the farm a bit. And he's got Todd Viney, but he doesn't have the team. Look at the people who are the assistant coaches. He had Luke Beveridge.
That's a soft cap too, isn't it?
Yeah, well, he had Luke Beveridge, Adam Simpson, Leon Cameron, in the early days, Damien Hardwick. I mean, this is...
Brett Ratton, yep.
Brett Ratton. He had an all-star cast of assistants. He had Chris Fagan, who was both footy manager and director of coaching. There was so many resources around him at Hawthorn that compensated for his weaknesses. And the things he's very good at were given full expression. And it seems like your point is that some of his abilities are being curtailed by the circumstances.
Well, Nick was saying he's not instilling fear into his defenders. Like they don't fear the wrath of the coach.
With the greatest respect, I think the problem that Alistair has is they don't have many defenders.
Defence is weak.
I don't know if I could name you a North Melbourne defender who would regularly get a game at most clubs. I mean, that's the reality of it. Since 2017, since they drafted Davis Uniacke at 3, they have basically exclusively drafted midfielders. They drafted Charlie Comben in 19 in the 30s. They drafted Jackson Archer, in the late 50s, who's 185.
Well, you can see their interest in Braden Maynard.
Yeah, who couldn't even consider going to North Melbourne right now if he was leaving Collingwood. Anyway, speaking of Collingwood, we're going to talk about them after the break.
We're online all the time. Just search Age Real Footy on Facebook or Twitter.
Give the Pies a 28-point lead. The goal in his 200. That's home. Goal play hasn't even moved. Jamie Elliott, what a star.
Yes, well, the Magpies continue to impress. I'm not sure how many of our tipsters gave them a chance against the reigning premiers, the Lions at the Gabba, which feels like a lifetime ago back on Easter Thursday. But Jake and Caro, despite being lambasted and criticised as too old and too slow, Craig McRae's men have put themselves in the frame to be considered a real force this year.
They have. They were unbelievable. And, there was an incident early in the season when Steele Sidebottom might have moved aside when he should have gone into the fray and then ended up winning the game for Collingwood.
Completely admitted to that, by
and
the way,
admitted
on
and
Triple M after
yeah,
the game.
and apologised. Since then, he's playing like a 25-year-old. and clearly Scott Pendlebury, actually, I keep thinking he's the captain. I know he's not the captain, but Darcy Moore's the captain. And Darcy Moore didn't have a great year last year either. He's completely come good again. When will Scott Pendlebury retire, Jake? And we laugh often.
I would have thought the end of this year, prior to this year, but I'm not 100% sure on that now.
When you're that fit and that disciplined and that much of a professional, you can play till you're 38, 39.
And do you know what? There are examples around the world, aren't there? Like, very few, but when you get that good, when you're LeBron James or when you're Cristiano Ronaldo, you can actually say, well, yes, I'm 38, 39.
Well,
but
I was thinking of Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer and Novak Djokovic. In tennis, they all played late 30s.
But that's a little bit different, though,
when
Jake,
McEnroe and Lendl and those guys were sort of early 30s.
But it's a bit different when it's an individual sport, because the thing with getting old as a team sport player is that you're constantly questioning, am I hurting my teammates by my form? But people like Scott and Steele are actually, if anything, increasing. They're bringing these kids along for the journey. It's been amazing to watch.
I reckon Pendlebury's lost a step, but it's still valuable. Still valuable, like Dangerfield. Dangerfield,
not the player he was.
Yeah, but he's still a very good player. So
we're only barely a quarter into the season, but they look so dangerous. Nick Dacos and Josh Dacos has been. He was unbelievable against Brisbane as well.
Yeah. Well, they don't have any injuries, so I think that if you look at the difference between last year and this year,
Touchwood, Collingwood supporters, we're looking to Touchwood here.
The biggest difference is the medical on the medical front. They apart from Jordan De Goey, who's had a very interrupted pre-season, isn't fit, and I'm not sure that there's necessarily.
I think he's declaring himself this week fit to play for Anzac Day, which gives Craig McRae a bit of a headache.
Yeah, well, I noticed that Darcy Moore did a.
Well, they've just been playing so well without him.
Yeah.
Darcy Moore got cleaned up in that incident and went off the ground for the where Jeremy Howe collected him when he was pushed.
Yes.
By Logan Morris, and the Logan Morris incident was looked at by the MRO. That Darcy was very quick to do an interview after the game. It was like he was affirming that he'd be available for Anzac Day very quickly,
which was very nice for Logan Morris. And Ryan Mansell says hello. I mean, it's clearly it depends on the injury to the other bloke, doesn't it?
Does.
Because the incident. Yeah, anyway, that's another
issue.
But
Collingwood are playing well.
They're doing brilliantly, and look. There was hubris last year. I don't care what anyone says. There was off-field mess. Their footy department was
Graham
in
Wright
disarray.
taking a sabbatical.
There was just a lot going on there. And they were drinking their own bathwater. They started the year that way and they never really recovered, although they almost made it. Played some great footy towards the back end of the season. What about the reigning premier? Did they have just a bad day, as their coach said? We prepared to because they haven't been playing well, but they've been winning up until now.
Yeah, they've had poor first halves, haven't they?
It just neither Will Ashcroft didn't have a great game. There was a few. Just a few below par performances.
I still think they're dealing, Jake, with, getting used to life without Joe Danaher a bit. I think we need to remember that.
Yeah, and I think that they rely a lot on Harris Andrews. Like people say Lockie Neal, but I think they rely more on Harris Andrews.
Do you?
Yep. Well, they've got the Ashcrofts and they've got
Dunkley,
and they've got McCluggage. They've got other good players around the ball. It was interesting to see how they handled Nick Dacos, and they sent Berry to him and had an instruction to get in his face a bit.
Yeah, didn't he?
And it was entertaining. That part of it was.
Well, they negated Dacos, but as Dacos said, that's what they want because then the other guys.
The other guys run around. Yeah, look, I'm not panicking on Brisbane. They were my pre-season tip to win it, and they've lost one game.
Could I ask you about the D's? They looked, Caro, a different team on Saturday against the Dockers. Now, I'm not sure if it says more about the Dockers, but they looked like a team who were hell-bent on moving the ball quickly. Helps when you've got a guy like Cozzy Pickett running around kicking five and attending centre bounces and all that sort of stuff. But it was the type of game, and now they play Richmond, it was the type of game that just got you thinking, can they find a way to dig themselves out of this hole and buy Simon Goodwin more time?
Yeah, look, they definitely they were impressive. Fremantle was, they're disappointing, Fremantle.
Very.
They just let you down every time, don't they? I've been saying that for years, but they really have. But Melbourne, no, I'm not prepared to throw my weight behind Melbourne just at this point. But it was a win they needed to have. And look, we've been bagging their crowds. We've been bagging their low membership. They've got a lot of problems, Melbourne. Hopefully they'll have a CEO by next week. Heaven knows who it's going to be. I wish I could find out, but I can't. They
well, if you can't,
25,000 people turned up on Easter Saturday, which wasn't bad. I thought
that was a good crowd.
Yeah, for a free
where they were at.
Yeah, I thought it wasn't a bad attendance.
You know things are going poorly when we're talking about 25,000 people not being a bad crowd.
Well, on Easter Saturday, for Melbourne supporters...
Well, the Tigers game, I know their supporters hate Marvel, but absolutely it's like a boycott, but they got 18 at Marvel, and Melbourne are a much smaller supported team, and they got 25. Now, it's the cricket ground, as some of them say. There's a few of those MCC people showed up. I didn't think it was... And those who went were rewarded because it was a pretty entertaining game. And with Keziah Pickett playing the way he didn't do himself any harm with if he does decide to go home or
his trade stocks.
Yep. Or with his contract.
Yeah, Brad Green telling Michael Gleeson earlier in the year that he's a minimum 3 first-round picks. That comment looks pretty good on the weekend.
I don't want to turn this into coach watch, and I know we do this, but surely Justin Longmuir is under huge pressure to keep his job if he doesn't make finals.
I was going to ask you about that, Caro. So
he's out of contract, so really I don't think he sticks around next year.
And the man who has backed him all the way, Simon Garlick, is considering moving to the AFL as Andrew Dillon's number 2.
Well, he ruled himself out on the weekend in a radio interview, but we don't really necessarily believe that.
So he's definitely going.
So
hi, Garlo, if you're listening.
They're in an interesting spot, the Dockers.
I think Simon Garlick, if he's true to his word, he needs to stick around and help this football club. If they're going to change on the coach, does he leave as well?
Well, all I'll say is
pretty
that
poor. I
if
reckon.
you look at Fremantle's playing list, if you put their best 22, 23 on paper, they don't want for much. They've got a forward line that's dynamic. They've got great key defenders and great kicking defenders. And they've got, an inside mid brigade that a lot of clubs would give their left arm for. Plus, you add a Bolton into that, who was brilliant on the weekend. They've got all the ingredients.
You know what they don't have, though?
What?
From first sight.
Yep.
And I haven't done a personality profile of the Fremantle list, but is there someone... There are certain players at clubs, and you would have seen this with Richmond when they were good, with Trent Cotchin and a couple of others. You would have seen it certainly with Joel Selwood and Patrick Dangerfield. Selwood to the highest degree. Scott Pendlebury and one or two others at Collingwood. Players who just refuse to accept defeat.
Well, Sarong
he's a good player.
Looks like that to me. Sarong looks like someone who would jump off a cliff for his teammates.
Yep.
That's just, I don't know him at all, but just watching him and talking to people. But I understand what you're saying.
See what I mean?
They're a bit introverted.
Well, are they unyielding? It's interesting, that they had Ross Lyon, and Ross Lyon's a fairly ruthless coach. And I would have thought that what happens is that you go from one type of coach, you often react to someone that's more holistic. You go from this type of coach to another type of coach. And, yeah, they should be doing better. The only thing that's surprising is when I looked at their demographic is that they're younger than I thought they were. Quite surprising.
Just as we build up to Anzac Day, we mentioned the Pies. We should touch on the Bombers, who just found their way over the line against West Coast. 2 wins in a row now heading into the Anzac Day clash, which is good. The handling of the Sam Draper situation, Caro, did you have a view?
Why?
Well, the fact that, he originally got the injury or felt soreness and then was sent back on because, he'd had the calf problems, but as Brad Scott was explaining after the game, it was on the other side. Now, no one here is questioning the medicos, and we understand that it's a tough caper, but it was an unfortunate look that he went back on, and then that terrible vision of him basically just collapsing.
It was awful.
Hard to watch.
Well, I don't see why we can't question medicos. I mean, we never used to over concussion, and now we know that we should have been, in the last few decades. It did look bad. You can only take Brad Scott at his word. Yeah. It was a different injury. I mean, on the positive note, Todd Goldstein's a pretty good story, isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, he's going to be rucking on Anzac Day.
35.
Against
36
against Darcy Cameron, who's in the form of his life,
and he's about to turn 37, and he's their sort of ruck coach, and they kept him on the list.
Well, good decision by Brad Scott,
and they obviously heading towards a mid-season draft. I guess will they go for another ruckman? I'm not sure. I guess they'll have to. Draper is a massive loss.
Yeah,
at a time when
he's out of contract as well, so it sort of complicates his.
Well, the loss is very big for him personally.
Huge,
because
he's
looking at a
long-term deal,
and that's not the time to have that injury. I don't know what you think, Sam, but I think it increases the odds of him staying. Whenever a player has an injury, I always think they're more likely to stay because the club feels committed to them, and they feel reciprocally more committed to the club.
Which makes your question about what happened during the West Coast game interesting. I mean, if there was mishandling, and he looked absolutely shattered.
It looked awful, yeah.
Shattered after the game. And it was a game they looked in danger of losing. So
they probably should have lost in the end, yeah.
It wasn't a great look. I mean, they were very fortunate to win.
In answer to your question, Jake, I would usually agree. Having said that, in this particular set of circumstances, I'm just not positive Essendon are desperate to keep him.
No, well, I don't know that they were because they would have looked at the draft compensation, but that is not going to happen now.
Yeah,
the club's not going to offer him...
Now that he's not a restricted free agent, which means
he's not a restricted free agent, so they can't do the matching game. And the second thing is that he's had this season-ending injury.
Okay, quick questions. Who's next?
Get access to every episode as it drops. Hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Very unhappy with what was said to him.
I think he
threw
it was
something.
an object that might have been flashed near him. Here's the incident there. That's what Alir was objecting to. Fans, you can't throw things like that towards the players.
Time for quick questions. In the first one, I'll direct first to Caro. Caro, did the AFL overreact to the incident with the teenager and Alir on the weekend at the SCG?
I believe I'm in the minority here, but I don't think so. He's been banned from attending the SCG, the 16-year-old boy, not 13, as was previously reported. I think that's a small difference. He's been banned for 2 years from going to games. He threw something at a footballer, but not only did he throw something, but from what I can see, he swore pretty disgustingly too at Alir. There's no suggestion there was anything racial in his comments, which people wondered early on. Yes, the security was heavy-handed. They were on high alert because Willie Rioli was playing, and there was a lot of concern about what might happen.
Yep.
But I don't think even a bit of cardboard, Jake, is acceptable. You don't throw stuff at footballers.
Well, it could get out of hand, yeah. It could get out of hand, so...
Nip it in the bud.
Nip it in the bud. He's 16, not 12.
Didn't like it.
Okay. Jake, could Marcus Bontempelli still somehow win the Brownlow?
I don't think so. I tell you who could win the Brownlow at the Bulldogs, though. Tom Liberatore.
Libba?
Well...
Become the second Liberatore to do it?
Well, go through the games and you'll find he could have close to double...
Not the store gift.
Well, it's not a handicap, is it?
I thought that rundown of Hill was so exciting. But I think Bont can still win their best and fairest. I certainly think that.
Yeah.
It was a pretty impressive comeback.
Super impressive.
Liberatore is playing And he been acting captain? I think he has, hasn't he? And
yep.
His leadership in the last few weeks has been extraordinary.
But he'll rival Bont for 3 votes in that game. So Bont will probably get the 3.
Yep.
And I think Bont's, the best player in the game, possibly the only player that we would debate it, and I don't think I'd be on my own. He would be Nick Dacos.
240 games for Tom Liberatore. It snuck up on people, hasn't it?
It's amazing.
Can I quickly ask you your view on the Bont contract? The Bontract, as I called it. He's going to stay. I think he can get a long odds that he'll leave. But how much money is he going to knock back? So Kilda will probably offer him, Fort Knox.
Yeah, I think he'll be in the top 10 players in the competition wherever he goes.
Should he be in the top?
I would think
3.
Yeah, possibly. But not to speak on behalf of Marcus, but from what I know of him, is that he's not a guy that's completely driven by money. He's just launched a new cafe in Kew, by the way, which I'm keen to try out. Anyway,
thanks, Sam, for
digress.
that little...
It was in the paper.
I don't think the Bont can win the Brownlow. I think Nick Dacos is looking pretty... I can't think of a hotter favourite at this time of year ever than Nick Dacos is at the moment.
Well, I just want to mark for the record that I think Libba's going to poll very well.
Okay. We'll revisit that.
We'll play it back, Jake,
when he
in
wins
September.
Last one, Caro. The Max King contract. So he's signed until 2032. Now he's injured, so it's a little bit unfair, but...
He's been injured so much, though, Sam.
Yeah.
He's been injured a lot. He's never... We've seen nowhere near the best of Max King ever, really. And he's... Look, I don't know why St Kilda signed him for so long, particularly when he was injury-prone, even when they signed him. I thought that was a poor decision. 2032, Sam. And he's going to be out for a long time now. What do you think? I mean, I'm not as obsessed by my colleague Kane Corns on long contracts, but I thought that was far too long.
It was generous, but what did they pay him? If you're going to sign someone that long with that injury record, you would hope that the number wasn't as high as it would be if he signed. His brother, conversely, has signed very short deals.
Yeah, I think
probably got more per year.
Max's deal is probably heavily front-ended as well, so that if and when they get better, he's on less money and gives them a chance to afford going after a big fish. Who knows, like a Tom de Koning.
Yeah, look, I mean, Patrick Dangerfield, I wonder what he's earning at the moment. It wouldn't be much more than $500,000. No, I don't reckon it would be.
No, I think it would be. I have a sneaking suspicion, just from what I'm led to believe, that it's a bit of a misnomer that Patrick Dangerfield hasn't been that well paid.
Oh, I'm not saying he didn't go on a great deal when he went to Geelong, but I don't reckon he's getting much anymore. Well, and he's certainly delivering value.
I was about to say, whatever he's getting paid,
it's all relative, Caro. They're paid better than most of us.
Okay.
Well, and so they should be. They give us a lot of joy and a lot of entertainment. People like Patrick Dangerfield.
Well, after Caro's big move to 7, we don't know. They've got an unlimited salary cap over there. That's all we have time for. Thank you to Caro and Jake for joining us. Thank you also to Seven and Fox for the audio we used in this episode. And as always, if you'd like to get in touch, you can do so via email, realfootypod@theage.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. The Tipping Pod will be back on Thursday. We'll see you then.